So today we're going to talk about an issue that we don't quite know is an issue most of the time. It's not something we're consciously aware of, and that is plant blindness. And what can you even really do about an issue you don't know about anyway? So nobody here, I don't think, is really going to argue that plants are important. Like, we obviously know that without plants being here, the course of humanity, the course of the planet would be very, very different. Without plants, we would have different terrains, different ecosystems, we would have different food sources, and quite frankly, we probably wouldn't even be here without plants. So why is it that when we're going around in our day-to-day lives that we ignore a lot of the plants or don't even know anything about the plants that we depend on to live, or the ecosystem around us, the wildlife, the terrain, depends on to survive and thrive? A lot of people would be surprised to learn that up to 75% of the world's food supply actually comes from 12 plant species. That's a lot of dependence on just a few species, and that has its inherent problems as well, but we can get into that in a different video. Out of the 170 roughly plants that we use to eat, there's about 399, 830 other species that are discovered or known in the world today, but we don't know about. This is a real term coined in 1999, which is called plant blindness, and this is the lack of awareness of plants around us in everyday culture, and there's actually a pretty decent reason why we don't think about this. So part of this term was coined to bring more awareness to the fact that as humans, particularly in Western world, we view plants as something secondary or less than the mammalian hierarchy. You have humans, then you have animals, and then you have plants. And then you might have natural resources versus that actually being a circle instead of a top-down hierarchy. Why do we have this? We don't need this. So when everything around us comes from plants, whether it's the food that we eat, the medicine that we take, the building supplies that we use, why don't we know more about this? I mean, when it comes right down to it, plants are just as valuable as animals or our pets or ourselves because everything in an ecosystem works together. If we're going to go that far, even the microbacteria in the soil is incredibly important to life on Earth, including us. In the hubbub of modern life, you have a million different things for your brain to pay attention to. So, of course, you're going to be worried about what you're going to have for breakfast and what your boss is going to say when you get to work because your brain's overloaded with stress already. It doesn't need anything else to worry about. So it kind of phases things out. This is a survival mechanism that people have developed over time just to make snap decisions. You don't need the plant in the crack on the sidewalk to be really factoring into your mental capacity when you have to worry about how you're going to pay bills, how you're going to survive, how you're going to feed your family. Like, a lot of people are worried about much more base survival worries and concerns that plants just kind of get ignored, and this is still a problem because if we don't acknowledge something, then it has consequences just like taking action. Lack of action is still an action. So how we treat our global resources kind of evolves or devolves, however you want to look at it, from this point of plant blindness, where we're unaware, we're not looking at it. You go to the supermarket, you pick up your rhubarb or your salad mix, and you call it done. You don't think about the step before that, where it was farmed, where it was taking in a lot of pesticides, taking in a lot of water usage. You don't think about any of that because you don't need to. It's easy. You go to the supermarket, supermarkets feed you salad. Why is this suddenly relevant in your life? It's always kind of been relevant, it's just we've been ignoring it. So not only does this affect our immediate environment, but with enough people doing this, it affects our global environment. I'm not saying that consumers are the issue here, because we all know that's not necessarily true in its entirety, but we do need to, as people, be more aware of the plant around us. The less that people pay attention to plants in their everyday means that there's less environmental awareness, there's less scientific funding for conservatories, these for educational programs, and thus the cycle continues where if there's not any of these things, we know less about our planet, about the plants that sustain it, and we don't know anything about them, so we don't fund them, and the cycle continues again, and you see where I'm going with this. Rarely as sessile organisms, meaning they stay in one place and don't move, do plants actually factor into our daily concerns. So how do you prevent plant blindness if you aren't even consciously aware that it's happening? To that, I would say there's a couple of options. Actually, you just have to make the conscious effort to actually look, with a capital L, at plants in your local environment and take into consideration how you're interacting with that. For instance, you want a fun Sunday evening, you can go to the public gardens. Some gardens aren't open that late, but some are, so go support them if they are. Supporting public gardens not only supports the conservation of a lot of plant species, it also helps fund educational programs. And to that point, I'd say take those educational programs, because those are people actively teaching you often about the plants in your backyard, and you can learn how to identify them a little bit better. In our cell phones, we have the world's information at our fingertips. Yeah, you do have to sort through and find everything that's actually informational and factual and not just another cat meme. There's things like plant identification, botany resources. Usually your local college has several resources online published by students and or professors. Another thing that you can do is make the conscious effort to look and to learn. What I mean by that is, it's not going to just magically happen because you just stopped and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this now. And it's going to take you a couple of weeks probably of just being like, okay, here's a reminder on my phone, or here's something I'm going to change in my morning routine, or I'm going to start taking classes, or, whatever you want to do. And we have to kind of get rid of the notion that learning isn't fun, because it is. You just have to learn what you want and how you learn it best. And look for seed programs, plant programs. And you know what? If you have some modicum of knowledge about a subject or about something around plants, don't be afraid to start a program. You can often go to your city for funding, crowdfund it through the local community libraries are usually a great resource for this. But ultimately, taking the time to learn and actually participate in classes, that's going to directly fund more research on plants, and it's going to give you a little bit more knowledge about maybe not your local plant life, maybe it is, but maybe it's a plant life in the tropics, maybe it's something you're interested in, maybe it's carnivorous plants, whatever you want to learn. There's a wild range of applications. You can go into different jobs if you want to do that, or you can just enjoy the fact that you have this knowledge and be happy with that. Even if you don't directly benefit from a plant, it's probably a keystone species in keeping the local environment together, or it could be a highly invasive plant that's destroying your native ecosystem. In an ecosystem, everything has to balance out. Yeah, I know that not everybody lives in a super natural area with lots of hiking trails or nature trails or facilitation of this kind of thing. There's always somebody interested in it, and you can always find those resources. You might just have to dig a little bit. It might be through a conservation, it might be through a botanical garden. No matter where you are, you're going to find somebody who's interested in plants and willing to teach you about it. And failing that, you have a phone again at your fingertips, so you can also find online resources, classes, educational programs. There's a ton out there. It's highly important to kind of start renaturalizing what we have. If you can, have a native balcony garden, have a rooftop garden. You have to get creative with it in an urban environment, but it's possible. If you have a small backyard, make sure you're planting native plants. Make sure you're not putting out pesticides that are going to harm the wildlife and flora, because you want to maintain an ecosystem and learn more about the plants that are in that, because that's the foundation of any ecosystem.